Okay.
Here we go.
This, my interest in use of video, I think maybe grew out of something a little different than some of the people, or many of the people in this group. I got interested in video mostly through an interest in ritual formalized speech registers. But after about 20 years of working on that, I got involved in looking at middle school kids learning to use a scientific speech register in the context of a NSF project. And the transcript I want to look at was originally published, as I understood it, we were supposed to use a transcript that we had looked at before, and I understood
to make it easy for you. Right.
That I understood our brief as being a bit confessional, and that we were supposed to talk about the things that we hadn't considered in some ways, and confess some of the things that were behind the scenes. This transcript was published in 2005 in Journal of Research on Science Teaching, and it was the outcome of a planning grant of what later became a 5-year NSF project devoted to evaluating science education curriculum units that had been evaluated highly by the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. There's something they had called a 2061 project that evaluated science curriculum units. Now, one of the things that you'll see, though, here is that this is also a science classroom, but as the sort of Shefflin body-voice axis shifts here, so you will see that the voice aspects of this are much more prominent, and I think that is one thing to investigate. Based on the scoring system that was set up by AAAS, we already had a good idea of what was considered a good curriculum. But one of the things we wanted to do was to figure out how it functioned in a classroom. Now, for many, this was an interdisciplinary project, and many of the colleagues, most of the colleagues on this interdisciplinary project, thought the premier way of studying studying how a curriculum unit functioned was to look at it with do surveys, before and after experiments, where you would see what the kids look like when before they got the curriculum and how they did after, and then race them against a control group, right? I was brought on as the ethnographer, the one ethnographer in the group, and I wanted to videotape the whole group. People thought that was kind of annoying, but they thought they tolerated it. We videotaped a group of 4 kids at a lab table every day as they experienced the curriculum unit. And we put a radio mic on the table and transcribed every conversation for about 3 months. We soon had something like 45 hours of video and transcribed it using a visual database software program called Atlas TI. And then that allowed us to link the transcription to that spot on the video. And used transcription conventions from what had this Jane Edwards book, Talking Data. We mostly used Jack Dubois' stuff. Upon completion of the transcription of the video, though, one of the big questions was, what are we going to do with all this data? Because we very quickly accumulated a very large, ultimately we had something like 180,000 pages of transcript that was all linked to the data. But how do you find in this ocean of transcript linked to the video stuff that's really relevant to the curriculum? And so one of the things we wanted to do was to search for certain keywords and look at sort of context in which they might actually be discussing something relevant to the main AAAS criteria. One of the criteria that we were looking at was, we were looking in this curriculum unit that we were looking at called Chemistry That Applies, developed actually at MSU. One of the benchmark ideas that they were trying to get across was the notion of conservation of matter. And So we were looking at for certain keywords like weight, which is a proxy for mass in this case. And we did a bunch of keyword search, and eventually we came across a bunch of really interesting, rich-looking conversations where they were actually talking over the course of several turns really about the concepts themselves. And that was one of the things that determined, made us want to look at that particular stretch of video in more detail. Because over the course of several turns, there was a verbal focus of attention, a lot of topic continuity about that topic. In this case, the outcome of the experiment. So, let me think. Another thing that I had been interested in also was the whole issue of lesson purpose. One of the things that I, as a linguistic anthropologist, had been very interested in was the whole concept of the role of intention in sort of generating meaning. And as we all know, intention is one, but only one of many ways of constituting the meaning of an utterance. And I was interested, one of the criteria, though, of the AAAS curriculum unit evaluation scheme was lesson purpose. And so they kind of privileged, in some ways, intentionality, and that really stuck out with me as something to investigate. So this is a bit of confession here that led me partly to be interested in this kind of clip, because I was interested, and in this clip, it was clear there was a dispute about, among these kids about the outcome of the experiment. I thought, maybe they're quarreling about the purpose of the lesson. So eventually, after it turned out that was the case, as it turned out that was the case, I went back and checked on these kids' previous discourse. So one of the things that you can do in a big study like this, but you cannot necessarily do in smaller ones, is that I was able to compare it to their other discourses in the past. And to what extent, I guess the bigger question for this group is, to what extent can we draw on extra textual information when we analyze a particular clip? So let me just show you this. Let me get this going. All right. So this kid here we called Mike. He's a white middle-class kid who was classified by Montgomery County as gifted and talented. This young lady is self-identified as African American. She does not receive special services from from Montgomery County. This young lady is young lady we called Angelique. Her name, this young lady was called Kim. She did receive special services, self-identified as Asian American. There's a little boy back here named Raphael, who had just transitioned recently from ESOL, we called, and he is a Salvadorian immigrant. And here's the transcript. So here it goes.
It didn't or it was
What do we do?
I want it stayed the same. The weight stayed the same. Because I made the bottle again. Yeah, but now the gas ran out. No, I want to wait. It lost weight. Yeah, you did. No, right now. Yeah, because we're going to finish this today.
It's the same.
It's not.
I mean, the end result's the same.
Oh, I'm talking about this.
Gas.
I'm talking about.
Okay. So, huh?
I'm just looking at his body posture.
Yes. So what happens here is as they often do in experiments on conservation of matter, they put vinegar and baking soda in two different bottles. One is open and one is closed, and then they weigh them after one lets the gas escape and so on. Mike argues that since he knows that actually often these experiments don't work, and he's also clued in onto this lesson purpose idea. And so one of the things that, and we've gleaned this from previous efforts on his part, where he spends a lot of time, I have no time left, where he spends a lot of time asking about what the lesson is supposed to be about. So we even searched on supposed to, and it turned out rich for Mike. And he's gifted and talented. And it turned out, Angelique doesn't do this very much, but she goes, wait a minute. No, actually, this one where the thing was open, actually, I want to weigh it again. She goes, I want to weigh it again. Weighs it again. She says, no, it lost weight. And he says, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. He goes, it stayed the same. Because he's thinking this is about, the purpose is about conservation of matter. And if you conserve things, they stay the same, right? And so, and Kim agrees with him. It's also worth knowing that both Kim and Angelique are kind of sweet on Mike. And so they're trying to get sort of attentional resources there. And Raphael is much more oriented to keeping up with what's going on. So he says, so what do we do with this next? And he's just trying to keep his head above water, really. I think he's trying to stay on track with all the stuff. Anyway, she says, no, it lost weight. And he says, no, it didn't. It stayed the same. Gas doesn't have weight. This is manifestly false. And
but matter takes up space.
right.
I've seen it.
But so one of the things that they both have, all four of them have to fill out a sheet together, right? So who wins the day in terms of what the sheet did? Well, Mike and Kim do, and they handed it in and got it wrong, right? So one of the things that was interesting about this clip, it sort of ended up becoming a kind of allegory for the whole project in a way, because in terms of outcome scores this is a large school district, and we implemented this thing over the whole school district, and it turned out that while it did not raise the outcome scores very much for the very well-served kids in the group, it raised the scores dramatically for relatively underserved kids in the group. And so they decided, based on using the video and the outcome scores, to ramp this up. And in fact, Montgomery County scores on their benchmark assessments went up for the next 5 years until they got a new superintendent who decided to try something else. Okay? So anyway, one of the big questions, though, for us is kind of the politics of these transcript preparations. And there were a bunch of things that I left out. When Mike does this, huh?
No,
I'm already way over time.
No, don't worry about it. We've got time.
Okay.
No, I
So-
was reacting to
so
that is a very interesting point.
Well, one of the things that we were really interested in is we ended up looking at statements like this: gas doesn't have weight. I'm preoccupied with things like that. These kind of ritualized, liturgical orations of this kind that clearly represent a shift in register. And we noticed that when kids produce those wind up disproportionately, those kinds of sort of scientific type statements they wind up disproportionately winning the day in the argument over what's going to get transcribed as the outcome of this experiment. And so the kind of rhetoric of the rhetoric at the table ends up trumping in some ways, to
Sorry. Sorry.
the some of the empirical experience in some cases, but this curriculum unit offered an opportunity to counteract that. Okay, so I guess I'll leave it at that.
And you could, in the transcript, use as a typeface for gas doesn't have weight. It could be in Gothic.
It could be. It should have been. Yes, it could have been. Or set to music, or set to
Musical accompaniment.
yeah,
Dun,
yeah, exactly.
Or it could be followed by a da. Sorry.
Yeah.
The liturgical trumps the empirical.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is a good.
yeah.
It's certainly
Official voice is the voice.
to bring.
of
He brings it
before.
Did you just hear what he said? He brought it right up to November 2016.
Yes, the liturgical trumps the empirical.
Thank you.
Can we ask a question as we shift?
Let's do it, right?
So I think what you've just described is unlike other things we've seen in the sense that this massive transcript is produced kind of on the front end. And then that transcript itself becomes a map of the corpus. And so you are able to do things with concordances and other things that are just, they're new ways of finding phenomena. That really, they're not using the transcript as a transcript of human interaction. They're using the transcript as an index into the record of human actions. And I think that's fascinating because I think that the technology is changing, and we're headed into a space where that's possible to do more easily, perhaps. I mean, with some forms of automated transcription that you could
I
get.
have narrativized this. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth going on when I would. But yeah, we had a team of a good team of undergraduate transcribers, 8 kids, all working in this lab constantly.
But that would be very
More than
different
20,000
from.
pages each.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Oh, there was
That's a lot of.
But that would be very different from producing what
Yeah.
Giddy Jordan would have called content logs, and then selectively transcribing pieces later on, which is what Chuck was, that's what I do, many people do that. This is like, transcribe the whole lot, potentially, maybe this is not what you did, and then use that transcript as an index to find things.
We did.
Another index to find things.
We did. I mean, we then looked for things like, we coded for things like scientific terms. We then coded for, one of the things that we were really interested in, some of you here interested in the relationship between grammar and, one of the things that we were really interested in, John will be in. We were really interested in nominalizations. Because one of the things that it turns out that if you're 12 is not that obvious is how to use a word like the push and the pull, and it turns out it's critical for learning Newtonian physics. If you're going to learn Newtonian physics, you have to be able to nominalize the push and the pull. And it turns out the kids that were able to nominalize, those ones were the ones who won the day at the lab table in terms of what got written down in the transcript. I mean, in the worksheet.
And there's cultural capital, right?
Exactly. Well, Mike gets special services. Angelique does not.
I mean, this is a really different
It's
framing
really
of group
unfair,
work
but-
than sort of this coordination tape. Like, you've got kids winning, right? As opposed to kids negotiating.
Well, they're doing that too.
meaning-making.
They're doing that too. But you know, at the end of the day, you have to submit a single.
Right, so there's a reified representation of what
Of a worksheet.
ostensibly what the group has decided.
Yeah.